To our first Tenant Service Committee meeting of 2020. I want to welcome everyone who is joining us, tenants and members of the staff. It's great to see you here. And to all of our Tenant Services Committee members, it's really great to have you all present in person. I know that people actually appreciate the eye-to-eye contact, so I appreciate that, and I know it's not always possible. I know that Councillor Fletch...
Sitting that way, there's no eye.
Yeah, it's true. Actually, we've got to work on that. We're going to work on these things. We could do a circle or something. Yeah, so we're working on that. We're going to work on that, and I know that Councillor Fletcher has to leave early today.
10 o'clock.
And I know that that you have another committee that you're chairing, and that's why. But we appreciate you being here for the beginning parts. Yes, Kevin, did you want to ask me?
Just given the councillor's time, is there a particular reordering of the agenda that you want to?
Let me just check. Let me open up the meeting. I'm just going to make a few remarks that we had our in-camera session on some HR matters with regards to staff that report up to this committee. And one report, we're working on getting the Ombudsman's report. Hopefully we will be able to have her come here and talk to us about what we can bring forward to the public session, and we'll be working on that. I do want to actually, before we start, just do a brief land acknowledgement. Toronto Community Housing is situated right across Toronto, and as such, we cover much of the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And we also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. As I do more and more of these land acknowledgements, both here and in other places, I would also like to take a moment to push ourselves a little further in terms of our call to action. That when we hear the land acknowledgement, we shouldn't just be thinking about the past, but that we should be thinking about the present situation. And I throw out to us as a board and to staff that we understand whether we're actually contributing to better housing for people of the First Nations people that live in Toronto. We have a huge community that lives in Toronto, and I have never seen any statistics about the representation within our housing and any barriers that we might be putting up to actually accessing. I know in healthcare, where I spend most of my day, we're working very hard on doing cultural safety training and being more aware. It's really changed my lens tremendously, and I haven't really heard that. So we can do these land acknowledgements, but we have to actually push it a little bit further. So that's my call to all of us. And if anyone wants to do a reflection at a future meeting in terms of the meaning behind this, I welcome you, because I think it shouldn't just be words on a paper. So with that, I welcome everyone, and I think what I'll do is actually ask if there's anything on the agenda, Councillor Fletcher, that you want us to reorder, just to make sure that you have an opportunity to. There's so much richness, actually, that.
I would only like to deal with short-term rental activity because of what happened at Queen's Quay Wharf.
Perfect.
That I think this board needs to be on top of what's happening in our portfolio.
That's great. Let's see if we can, so we'll go to that one first. I'm going to just go through the consent agenda and see if there's anything that we can, that you want held. Approval of the agenda, anything to add to the agenda with that reorder? Any conflict of interest?
Sorry. On the consent, we do have a deputant who wanted to speak to item 2D. It's Susan Gapka.
Okay, Susan, okay, on 2D. Okay, so we'll hold that one. Any conflict of interest? The minutes of December 5th. Okay, the vacant unit action plan. Hold that. And for Paula too, and the market rent update.
Hold that, find out how they're promoted.
Okay.
They're not on any website. You'd never know about them.
All right, so since you're interested in those two as well, Paula, are we okay if we actually tackle those first? Okay, so can I get an approval for A, B, C, and everything else as a whole? Debbie, and a seconder. John, all in favor? Great. Okay, so D, should we do the deputation first?
Yes.
Okay, so Susan for D. the tenant engagement refresh.
Here I am, Susan Gapka, 145 Mutual Street. It's not working. Is it? Hello? Yes. Is it?
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel like it. Hi.
Yeah, and we are
I'm
actually,
just demonstrating
I
again.
should say to anyone who's actually watching, because I can see Susan in the camera back there, welcome to the online as well. And I do now believe that we are actually capturing this and people can view it many times after as well.
Oh, I can't find the clock. There, my name's Susan Gapka. I'm a tenant, very involved in tenant engagement, 145 Mutual Street. Used to be a tenant rep. That was dissolved about a year ago. We're eagerly waiting for the next round of tenant engagement to begin. Do I have to do that again?
No,
Okay,
go
I've
ahead.
started my time. Who's checking my time? Susan Gapka, still here, still queer. Whoops, wrong meeting. So good to see you today. I'm just another example of just on time delivery. Thank you for starting your meeting after I arrived. This has been a long process. I just had notes up in my building that next Wednesday we're doing the building committee meeting discussion, which actually should have happened in the fall before we voted on that model. I was a member of the elections working group, and at no time did we discuss how to operate elections. And I suggest to you that staff aren't necessarily the best at doing community development and directions. But I do need to let you know, Mr. CEO Kevin, how annoyed I was that when you came in and did the restructuring, or I'll go through the chair of the board, but how we were in the middle of this engagement process in the ending of summer and the fall, and suddenly we're having community consultations and town halls with about restructuring. And so I just want to plead to you with all my heart and energy and determination that staff be directed and have the resources to fully implement this engagement model in the next 6-month period. Because it's really, these are our everyday lives. These are our, our hopes and dreams, and diminished sometimes, but arisen from the dust. And it's really important that we follow through on this. And I think, we're 2 years behind on the implementation schedule. Okay, I'm going down. Which clock shall I use? The one thing I wanted to highlight was, luckily, at the end of the last session, I thought we had lost it, and I'm going to keep mentioning it. Nice to see you, board member. Is that we did do I've been talking about doing a anti-oppression and anti-racism framework, and thank you. I just saw, I hear you're all going to be using pronouns in your signatures soon, so I use she and her pronouns. Thank you for being mindful of that in your policy and strategic direction, because we want to know that everyone is included. And so when we come back, we look at who's at the decision-making table, and we look at who our tenants are, and they're younger. They're not like me. I wasn't a senior when we started tenant engagement 10 years ago, but golly, I am now. But they're young people. They're racialized people. And with the working group, we had some of those people involved, and I think it was a positive experience. But I tell you, we have our bumps. But as we move forward, just want to be mindful that that is part of the strategy going forward. Because things that happen on the ground, and security's here, I know that. I met the security on the way in, is, we have a lot of stuff going on in our neighborhoods. So if we're going to be tenant leaders and engage in the process, we need to be mindful of how certain types of stigmas and attitudes affect all of us in having healthy neighborhoods. I had a closing statement when I got here, but I know what it was. Yeah, I just remembered. Thank goodness. I got 2 minutes too. Thank you for your service to the City of Toronto, to the Toronto Community Housing, to the staff and all the volunteers. You know, I have my saddle, and I've got a horse waiting for me. All I'm waiting for is the sunset so I can ride off and let younger people, let the people who live in our communities be engaged and be a mentor to them. And, you know, help us get that sunset in place within the next 6 months. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Lovely image to get us started, but lots of really good words too, and a commitment. I think our committee has to make sure that this tenant engagement occurs, and that there was some good stuff that happened, but we have to make sure it's on track. Can I have an approval for the tenant engagement refresh update? Debbie and Uba, all in favor? Great. And then we have a hold on the vacant unit action plan. I think somebody had a question on that.
Chair, the short-term rental, are we going to?
Yeah, we can go to that. People held the other items too.
Yeah, we can come back.
So we can come back to that. Why don't we go to, so we'll come back to that and we'll go to the short-term rental activity, which is very timely given some of the very difficult scenario that happened on the weekend. Do you want to start with that? Because it's the general counsel or chief? Or do you want to raise your question first, Councillor Fletcher? I'm just, we jumped to number 8, the short-term rental. Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's the policy in terms of what we're doing to ensure that people are not renting out.
Correct. So in the current lease arrangement that Toronto Community Housing implements, tenants are not able to provide short-term leases out of TCHC units. And we have been trying over the past few years to put a process in place that would enable us to track when tenants within Toronto Community Housing are making those arrangements with Airbnb. We have met with MLS recently over the last few months and learned from MLS that in fact with the new licensing policy that the city has to require people who want to use their property as short-term rentals such as Airbnb that they have to arrange for a license with MLS. MLS will cooperate with us. We'll give them a list of our properties, and when and if our tenants apply for a short-term rental license, they'll be denied through the City of Toronto's MLS office. So we are now in a position to have a tool through the City of Toronto to help us ensure that these short-term rentals don't occur in TCHC properties. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions?
A few years we've been trying to figure this out, is that what you said?
So we initially went to Airbnb to see if we could get some kind of cooperation from Airbnb to have them restrict our properties. We were unable to do that. And it's through the City of Toronto conversation with them that we're able to work with MLS now to make this happen.
I've just gone online. We do know all the addresses of our buildings, so don't we?
We do.
And has anybody, we have a large staff at TCHC, has no one gone online at Airbnb and put those addresses in to see if there are any rentals available at those buildings?
So we've investigated that with our investigations unit because from time to time
Yes, and the answer?
is that Airbnb doesn't list available short-term rentals by municipal address. They will, if you're booking a short-term rental through an Airbnb site, provide a pictorial that indicates where approximately in the city the unit is located, but You don't receive the municipal address until such time as you're making the actual booking. What we've done now is,
Just did it. I just did it.
I'll follow up with you as to how.
What? I'm just gonna,
So we have now written to municipal licensing standards, provided municipal licensing standards with a list of all of our properties, municipal address, and requested that they not issue Airbnb registrations for any property at that address.
first of all, we are way behind on this. Are you telling me that in our buildings, our superintendents and other tenants don't know that people are moving in and out of there daily? Are you actually telling me that our staff don't know that? And,
I don't know how to answer that,
well,
Councillor.
I'd like to know what that, I'm sorry, I'm going to be very sharp on this.
So I think
Because it is illegal, has been totally illegal, unless somebody's living there to rent that apartment. And it's up to the landlord to pull their places off or deal with their tenants.
I agree.
And it became 100% illegal when the OMB said you're no longer able to rent your place out. But even here, for us, it's illegal to be having a sublease, or if you have an extra room, you're obviously overhoused. I am very concerned. How could the building manager, how could the caretaker not know? Not know. I have to ask you that. I think everybody's asking that. How could someone not know? There's people in and out of there with bags all the time.
So I can follow up with operations staff, I can speak with the union, we can get communications out. It is an issue in our buildings. Through this process, we'll now be able to ensure that these activities don't occur. We're doing our best every day, and I can't speak.
MLS has no new staff, they're not, I just believe that this committee and this board is going to say, make that a top priority, get those closed down, get the eviction notices given. Those are perhaps RGI. How can we have an RGI unit that somebody's renting for profit? And nobody knows about it. If this is the case, that building superintendents don't know, that is a big canary in the coal mine here, people.
It's a very good point that you make, Paula, and we will make it a priority. If it's a priority for the board, we'll make it a priority.
150 Dan Leckie Way, that's our building. Everybody knows there's Airbnb units in there. I'd like by the board meeting to know that that location has been dealt with expeditiously. They are illegal. And what would our stance be once we know that's happening? Is it going to be an eviction notice? What's the plan?
I think you can't actually answer whether they're going to be evicted, but,
Well, I'd like to know from staff.
Yeah.
What is the plan when someone's running an Airbnb and it has been illegal now for a couple of months?
So from the perspective of enforcement, our staff don't have the same investigatory powers as MLS officers. They don't have the right of entry of units without.
Sorry, I don't like to interrupt, but once you know of a unit in a building, what is going to happen?
So once we know of a unit in a building, my expectation is that we would take appropriate enforcement activity against that illegally operating short-term rental. That may involve seeking to investigate whether the short-term rental amounts to RGI fraud because there's undisclosed income. And if it doesn't involve that type of behavior, it would still constitute a breach of the tenant's lease with TCHC, and we would take appropriate enforcement up to and including eviction in order to address that situation.
So
if we're in terms of individual circumstances, we should talk about that offline, but that is
Well,
generally,
everybody in the city knows.
everybody in the city may know.
What if you find out our staff know?
Then we should be taking appropriate, it may be that our staff don't understand, and we may need to do training. I'll allow Sheila to speak to that, as to what we can do, especially in light of the change that's taking place at the municipal level with the new bylaw. But our expectation is that we will enforce our lease rights.
But we haven't enforced any so far.
There are challenges.
I'm just asking. Have there
I don't know that we-
been
I don't know
any
that-
enforcements around Airbnb here?
I don't have that information at this time.
I don't have that information either, but we will, as
Oh.
council has indicated, we'll make this a priority for our staff and ensure that communication goes out, training happens, and
So we'll make it a priority. Follow-up. Thank you for raising it. And we have deputy as well?
Excuse me, and Paula, just as follow-up, well, we will, by the time we get to the board meeting, I will bring something forward in terms of 150 Dan Lucky Way. I just want to note, though, the one, not that it impacts how we would deal with the tenant, but 150 Dan Lucky Way will not be the subject of any RGI fraud, because 150 Dan Lucky Way is a market rent building.
Okay, but
Still the same
still illegal.
Yeah.
It's
And
illegal.
that's why I said it wouldn't change how we would address it. I just wanted to clarify that.
I gave you another address, I don't know what that is, but that's also illegal.
And I'm assuming as well that as information go out to staff as a reminder, that tenants will also get an update in terms of.
Yes, yeah, that's a really important communication.
In terms of the use of their
Yeah.
units.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think we all need to say in the context, because folks may be viewing this without context, that our concern is that we have thousands of people on a wait list.
Yeah.
And if people are overhoused, or if people are not using their units, especially RGI, then there's a huge concern for us there.
Councillor
I just want to say that every brick, every nail that has gone into building, housing, that is subsidized is for people that need it,
Right.
not for people to be making hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars at the expense of people that need housing.
Absolutely.
It should concern every one of us.
Yep.
It infuriates me.
Yep.
And I'm very concerned that we don't have a high, that this is the level of reporting we're having here, and that we don't have a higher understanding, because we have superintendents in every building in this city.
Thank you. I'm going to let the deputy attendant come, and then we'll finish up. And thank you for, Catherine, thank you for letting me actually do a procedural change and letting Councillor Fletcher speak first.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. My comment's probably not even going to take a minute, I would imagine. So first of all, I just want to put it out there that most of our tenants have never seen or heard of either of the policies that we're talking about. So there needs to be an educational component to make sure they know what the rules are. Yep. Now, I'm loath to say put up another poster, because our communities are wallpapered in them. However, if you want tenants to comply, beyond the lease that they might have signed 25 years ago, you need to remind them what the policy and what the rules are. The other piece I wanted to add to this that I think, I wanted to add to that also that market rent tenants are of the belief that they're exempt from telling you whether or not they have additional occupants in their unit, because they pay quote-unquote market rent. So they need that little reminder as well. But I think the piece that's missing when you're talking about the visitors and guest policy, something else that needs to be addressed is what we're calling, and I don't like the name of it, but it is what it is, what we're calling unit takeovers, where someone moves into a tenant's unit, and I realize we have something called, unauthorized occupants, but we also, I think, need to educate tenants, particularly those who are targeted, and someone takes over their units, and that includes, the people at risk would be seniors, vulnerable tenants, single mothers, where someone sort of forces their way into their unit and takes over. And so the language around that needs to be from the landlord, not bringing the hammer down, we're going to evict you. It has to be, we're here to help you. Please, come forward, contact us. We've got to do it in a way that people who have someone who moves into their unit feel they can come to their landlord to get help, than live in fear to have this person in their unit. That's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe I can add too that maybe building in some of the processes like a neighborhood watch. Anybody who lives in a building kind of probably has a sense of people that are coming and going. I know they have that in some condominiums now, where you can actually find a line to contact if you see regular strangers coming into a unit, because there's telltale signs. But I think Catherine actually raised a really important point though too, in terms of vulnerable tenants being exploited, and they also having supports if they're actually being exploited to like by other family members or other people to use their tenants their unit for something else. So that's a really good point. That has come up here before and is really quite frightening. John, I think you had a comment.
Oh, I'd like to make a motion,
Okay.
and that it being that staff report to the next Tenant Services Committee with an action plan to address the short-term rental of TCHC units that includes an enforcement, communications, and training program.
Great. And a seconder, Debbie, any comments? All in favor? Great, thank you. We will bring that to the next meeting.
Note that I didn't say the board, to give you a little time to...
Yeah, so it was to tenant services, right?
You didn't say report to the board, which is important.
Right. Okay, let's flip back to the vacant unit action plan, which is, I think we had a hold on that as well, which is the consent agenda E.
Right. I'm going to go there. So a couple of questions arising out of this. Do we know how many new residents got housing in 2009 from the wait list? So this talks about reducing the vacancy rate. Obviously, there's people moving around, but how many do we have a way of tracking how many new people have come off the wait list?
We'd have to, I don't know the answer to that question, whether we have that. I don't have that information readily available to me, but I would think that in conjunction with SSHA, who manages the wait list, we should be able to get that information.
Now, in regard to the market vacancy rate, do we, because I went online and I couldn't find online a list of market units available. And I just want to know, is there an ongoing list of market units that should be up? Is that our intention, that market units should be listed by address as to what's available? Because I don't see it now.
So as of the start of January, we have begun to list market rent units on the Toronto Community Housing website. I just brought it up on my phone. Not all 82 units are on it yet, but they will be in short order. And then we are also going to be listing those market rent vacancies on a public-facing website or on a commercial rental website as well.
Okay, and I'll defer to Paula because I know she had some direct questions.
Oh, no, following up on.
Oh, okay.
You keep going.
Okay, so in terms of the number of units, we have 1,000 units as of the 1,022 units as of the end of the year. And it's 1.83, 1.25. What's the industry average for vacancies in a portfolio of rental units?
Generally 2%.
2%.
Right. So we have brought our vacancies down considerably. But like the board, we believe that we should not have one market rent unit vacancy. So we're making efforts and steps to get those out publicly.
And have we established a target? Is there a target? Is the target, 1% or 0.75 or 0.8? Have we as a board or as an executive ever said that our target is such and such?
The target has generally been, since I've been here and before, has been 2%.
The target's been 2%.
Right.
Across all units.
Across all units.
RGI and market.
Okay. And so when a unit is vacant, how long is it taking to fill the vacancy? Do we have is there a number on that?
Yes. So it would depend on the condition of the unit, what it takes to turn it.
So let's say a unit, I mean, I know we do a refresh, we do a painting, we tidy the place up. Let's say it doesn't require
If it's
significant repairs.
If it is a fairly simple refresh, so that there's no major work, it's basically kind of clean and painting, it's generally about a month, for you to cycle through that unit. It's when there is, substantive more work on it. And if you look at where the vacancies are, there is a very large amount of vacancies in the in the bachelor unit, which is just not, fallen out of favor, so to speak.
So just in the way we keep statistics, there is non-rentable unit types, staff use and agency use. Those numbers are fairly steady. Obviously, those are spaces that are needed by the community. Just wondering, why we don't just take those off the list and eliminate? There's it doesn't seem reasonable for us to say there are 392 units that could be rented but aren't, but they're being used by agencies which help the community. It just seems, and in total, between staff use and agency use, it's 583 units. People could be living in, but they probably never will, because those are required units to carry on the business of the organization. So it just, in my view, it just should be, that should be just taken right out.
Good comment, thank you.
But if I could, the agency units will be occupied when the transfers happen and the repairs are complete. For example, 389 Church is included in that number. And those units will come back online.
We have 392 for agencies, though. Certainly, some of those must have been in place for years, I would think.
Yeah.
It's on page 4 of 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, 392 are being used by agencies. I mean,
Sheila, can you explain that some more? Because I'm reading this as meaning that there are service agencies who are using those units. Why would the service agencies be moving out?
So, for example, and I use 389 Church, which is a large building, had over 200 units in it. It's being modified. Units were built in pods. They're being modified now to 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom units. That building will be transferred to an agency, and those units will be rented. The agency hasn't been selected yet, so
The agency's taking the whole building, not agency space.
I see.
Why don't we know what those are?
Okay,
then?
so just so we're reading this correctly then,
Yeah.
when you say agency here, are you, because I think this was John's understanding as well, when it says agency, are you then telling me these are agency-controlled units? Because we were reading it as these are units that are used by agency services.
So this is units that are currently under refurbishment that are going to be transferred to agencies. So entire buildings that we're working with.
This is not how we were reading this at all. So these are all, so we have 381 units that are all being refurbished and will be managed by a service agency.
Right. The units that agencies are managing, the vacancies related to those are included in our overall vacancy number.
because they are rented. Units that are referred to an agency, those units are rented. So what's listed here are non-rentable units. So right now, in the system, we have 392 units that are being refurbished or are in the transfer, or are in the process of being transferred to an agency.
Councillor Fletcher?
Then, I'm sorry, those are technically under redevelopment. And when they're transferred, they'll be tenanted. The
Correct.
same as any of the other redevelopments that are now empty.
Yeah.
So I think we need to add that redevelopment. It is 389 is being redeveloped. We're paying for it. and then we're going to put out an RFP, and then
Exactly.
somebody's gonna manage that building.
Yeah.
But it is not, it is part of we're putting large capital dollars for that, and there's others. So I think
That's why it's there.
I don't think it should be there.
Yeah.
I want to be strict about what that is, because I think that's confusing. And the capital repairs, I'm not sure. I'm just going to go with the average that you mentioned, Sheila, of 2%. So I'd be interested to know what that is for a wood green, or what that is for a green win, what that is in the industry with those who do housing, close to what we're doing. But some of those units that are in that 2% would no doubt be ones that were under capital repair. Would they not? When we're saying that's the industry average, 2%, what does that include? Just vacant, or vacant that are rentable, and ones that aren't rentable for different reasons? I believe that would make up their 2%. So if we're going to compare, we have to compare the same.
Right.
And comparing a building that is being refurbished, assuming a landlord is doing that, a wood green or a greenwin or somebody else, that's the number that we have to compare ourselves to, not ones that we have empty and then ones we call non-rentable.
We'll make sure that the statistics we're providing are consistent with it,
that's
so,
what I think John's asking, what is
Yep.
that?
yeah.
Are we at that target? Are we below that target? Because 392 units, more than likely, should be added when we're looking from our purposes as to what, compared to an industry standard, what that means. That's the first thing. And I've got a question. So that means here, looks like we've now rented, it's come down, and Q1 to end of Q2, we've rented 500 units.
Correct.
That's what that shows. And what are some of the problems with renting the other 1,000? Well, 82 of them are market. Now you've got those posted, which is great. What about the 920? Why are those not rented? And are they clustered somewhere? Are they scattered around the city in different buildings, or are there clusters?
So some of that's just going to be normal churn, so that they're not difficult units to rent. They're just in the process of being, returned and refurbed either through minor modification or major modification. The one item that sticks out when you look at the balance of those units, there's about 322 of the units are bachelor units, and they tend to be more challenging for us to rent. There's a lower demand for that, despite the fact there's still people on the list and the sites. So certainly, we can do the demographics of not the demographics, but the profile of the bachelor units by address. I don't have that just readily at my fingertips, but that.
They're clustered, Sheila?
Sorry?
Do you think they're clustered?
So we
By building?
have actively been looking at where the bachelors are with shelter support and housing. We have a pilot underway in 3 buildings where we've got more than 10 units to provide appropriate supports to individuals coming out of the shelter system, to put those individuals into those buildings. So it is the hard to rent bachelors is a priority for staff right now, to see what we can do about getting those rented in a way that provides ongoing support for the tenants that need it, that are going to go into those buildings, and doesn't detract from the peaceful enjoyment of the building for the rest of the tenants. So it is an area that we have a high level of focus on right now.
So that's 322. So I think it's very helpful, and I think congratulations are in order to have rented out 400 or 500 units in the last year.
We made a
deciding to
real
do that.
push.
Yes, you
Yeah.
can see that.
Yeah.
Thank you for achieving that. It's great. But just understanding in relationship to other nonprofits, how they put their vacancy rate, how many they may have vacant at one time in their whole portfolio, percentage-wise, and what they would include there. I'm sure capital repairs would be included in there. And since we've taken out all the ones related to redevelopment, we can't, that doesn't count, because nobody else has that many units out of commission.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons why, I'm just gonna go back to previously, when we have that many units out of commission, to have any units at Airbnb, it's so patently unfair, because we've pulled so many units out.
Yep.
We have 1,500 units unavailable because they're part of a larger redevelopment scheme. That's a lot of money that's missing from us, but it's also that many units that aren't available to people that need a place to live. And so that's why I'm just so hard, I'll say line, but I was going to say another three-letter word, about this situation.
Thank you. With that, I think what I'd like to do is ask for approval for both, I think, did we do D? I think D, E, and F? We did D.
We did. D.
Okay, so for E and F, because I think that we've actually talked about both of those items in the last comments. Can I get an approval for information for E and F? Councillor Fletcher, seconded by John. All in favor? Great, thank you. We're going to now move into the business arising from the public meeting minutes. Anything from the, do we have a deputation on that? No, so I'm looking for an approval for the business arising of the public minutes. Amanda, was that you saying you can approve that? No? Anyone have any?
I'm trying to find the matters arising out of this.
Debbie, are you okay with the business arising
I'm
minutes?
just trying to take one quick
Okay, do
look
you want
at
to
it.
take a minute? I'm fine to stop, I just need to be directed by the committee. There's no deputants on this, and I'm looking for an approval for information on the business arising from the public minutes. It's number 3.
That's not my number 3.
Have fun looking for it.
Anyone? Any takers?
Come on, it's
Just a
hard to
minute.
find things.
Okay, no
Found it.
problem.
I found it. Yes, fine.
We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, Debbie, the seconder. Amanda, thank you. All in favor? Great. Okay, we're moving on to the performance report for operational performance for the Chief Operating Officer. And we have a deputant. Ms. Wilkinson.
Thank you again.
No, Dan?
Oh, I think it was working then. Yeah, it's on.
Test. Okay, much better. Okay, so there's just two quick comments I want to make on this, which you'll be surprised. I'm not going to go through every single page and the key performance indicators in the various areas, because there's other items on this agenda that where I will address some of the things and touch on them that might be in this report. But what I want to say is I noticed that this performance report has been added to the Tenant Services Charter. But what I want to point out, and I guess we're all looking for reassurance, that this report still will go to the Board of Directors. It's not coming here instead of going to the Board of Directors, because the CEO, as you know, is hired by the board and is responsible for reporting back on the strategic plan and specific key performance indicators on a regular basis. So we can't not bring this forward to the board. I'm just pointing that out, and we could certainly argue about that if you think we could. And the other brief comment I wanted to make was in regards to the administrative calls and calls for service. We have struggled over the years with staffing capacity to manage the call volume at the call center for maintenance requests and administrative calls. Largely it's because we changed the way in which we wanted tenants to request service. So there was a time when everybody was told call the call center. Then there was a time you could talk to your local staff, you could call your tenant service coordinator about rent. Then that changed to everybody call the call center, whatever your issue is. So a tenant service coordinator who managed your lease, you were no longer allowed to contact them by telephone. In fact, the numbers were changed. So you couldn't contact that staff person directly, or as I like to call them, the untouchables. So now that we're moving to this new structure at Toronto Community Housing, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to assume that because these people will now be in our buildings and in our hubs, that they will in fact be ready and accessible to tenants and face-to-face. We don't have to go through a call center who's going to grill us about why we're calling our tenant service coordinator, because we'll actually have access to meet them face-to-face. And the same applies to maintenance and service requests, where you could go to your super and say, oh, well, I have a leaky tap. And they say, well, call the call center. I'll make a work order. Well, no, you're there face-to-face, and tenants come to you. There's an expectation that the super would address that. Now, it may mean they have to create a work order online themselves, but, oh, well, that's part of their job. So all in all, in the end, if my assumptions are right, that having local staff is going to change up the way service is delivered to tenants, and it's going to be more expedient and faster, and that's what we're all aiming for, then at the same time, the number of calls going through to our call center will significantly be reduced, and we need to stop throwing everything at the call center every time we do a survey in any event. So those numbers would be reduced, and then over time, likely that headcount would also be reduced, where most of the issues should be addressed locally. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin, do you want to kick off this, or and then we'll open it up for questions? I assume people have read and will have comments as well.
Yeah, Sheila and I think I'll take it as read, and Sheila and I are available to answer any questions.
And I see a hand up, Uba.
I just want to echo what Catherine was saying. I'm quite pleased that we're doing this change. I'm bringing services to the tenants. And now my hope is that I think we're doing a great work to train those frontline workers, especially the first point of contact, which is the superintendent, and until the manager and everything in between. So people will have less frustration unless, if you call it, run around. So I'm pleased we are on this journey. Thanks, Catherine.
Great. Any other questions? John?
The amount in arrears, as I recall from arrears reports, is anybody that's past due, and it can be 5 days or 10 days. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
Wouldn't it be more meaningful if we set the amount in arrears in excess of 30 days, or like the problematic ones? Because if somebody forgets to drop their check off on the first of the month, it's being tallied here. And, Kevin, have you looked at?
Yeah, I mean, we have an aging on it. We're trying to, distill the information down. The reality is that if you're in arrears, and whether it's, and I would tell you, John, that much of the growth in arrears is the growth over 30 days, not under 30 days. And so it focuses the same event, but certainly I can, and we have reported all the aging in the past. Sometimes you just get hammered with so much data that you lose the information. But certainly I think if you want to look at, kind of arrears under, a month versus arrears over a month, I mean, we can certainly, track that out as a separate item, and you can see where the growth is on the two.
So on percentage of routine maintenance done within 5 days, I think that is a pretty good number, 71% of routine maintenance done within 5 days. Do we have a target that would be, and do we expect with the restructuring and the trying to be more tenant focused that number will improve?
So it's our plan through restructuring, and the deputant summarized it very well. I thank you for that. To bring all of these stats, these tenant-facing requests for service, to provide better, more effective service for tenants. That's the goal of restructuring, including bringing arrears down we're looking to, and we've been working with Cynthia and her team on the arrears collection process to bring more direct support to tenants locally to help them pay their rent, understand when the rent's due, and manage arrears. So we'll be looking for significant improvements in these numbers once the new model is fully.
So will we set it, so for routine maintenance done within 5 days, which can be, fixing a leaky faucet to, Venetian blinds or what have you, or fixing a stove or something, do we have a target? Because right now it's 71%. Is the target to get to 80% or 90% within 5 days?
The target generally has been around 70% now, so we would certainly look to move that up, and that's, my comment, in the details was, well, on average, it's been that. There's been deterioration in the last 2 quarters, and so we are working to rectify that.
Okay.
Thank you. Debbie? Just back to the arrears. Do we have breakout based on demographics in terms of the households that are finding themselves in this situation? And I'm thinking back to John's point, I'm thinking of those who are 30 days or more in arrears. I'm trying to figure out if this is a seniors issue.
Well, we've got the seniors split out separately. So if you look at on page 6 of 8 is the arrears relative to seniors, and actually there's been, in the narrative I talked about it, that the performance, the deterioration arrears is more in the family portfolio than it is in the seniors portfolio. Seniors has been relatively stable. We've added resources to the seniors effort. We've identified kind of what the issues are that are causing arrears, and we're kind of working with that. And very often in the seniors portfolio, just as an example, when they trigger into benefits that they receive from the government because of their age, very often that will kind of create a change in rent and therefore an arrears that takes place that they're not aware of. And so it was actually kind of in some of the discussions we had with Cynthia and her group in terms of proactively getting out in front of that when people are changing, so that, the tenants are aging, so that we know that date and that we work with them in advance of that so that they don't get into an arrears situation. It's that sort of thing that is going on. And it's a similar sort of thing that we need to do within the family portfolio, as well. It's a larger portfolio, a little more complex, but it's the same sort of general activity anyways.
Okay, I have a question. Can you explain to me arrears due to loss of subsidy?
Yes. So typically how that will arise is if a tenant does not complete their annual information form for the annual rent review for the RGI, there's a point in time, and Sheila can tell me the specific point in time that will trigger market rent until they do complete that, and that's what that is arranged. And once that form is completed, there's an entry against this, and so it's eliminated.
Okay, so are we being proactive on the seniors portfolio, when I'm looking at Cynthia, so that we know when an individual seniors form is due, so someone is reaching out to them before that date and helping them to complete it? I'm just trying to figure out the amount of support and how proactive we are around the seniors file.
Can speak to this as well, but they are notified by TCH 6 months in advance of turning 65 and encouraged to complete the applications for the pensions. Sometimes they don't do that. In regards to OACH, we're, as I was mentioning earlier in camera, we're about to go out and do training with seniors on this exact matter, as well as their rights and responsibilities under the legislation. And we're going to be going to all of the 18 new seniors units to do this training. So that will be proactive. We did it last year as well, but this year it's in some ways it's easier because we know which buildings to start with. And then that can be rolled out across TCH if we find that's effective.
Do we send out these notices in first language other than English or French?
My understanding is that TCH sends them out in English, but that there's a note attached to it indicating where they can reach out for different languages. And there's...
If you don't read English, you can't read the note.
I think the note is in the various languages.
Yeah,
but that is something that through the integrated tenant service team that will be on site end of March, we'll have a better frontline contact with tenants to be able to help them understand when they are in danger of falling into arrears and help them correct that. So right now there's, I with no disrespect to staff, say that, you know, a lot of the communication between staff and tenants who initially come into arrears is through notices, eviction notices called an N4.
Yeah, that's my
which
concern.
is not something that may be understood, well received. So we're looking through the arrears collection process to change that and have significant outreach before that N4 is issued, especially where vulnerabilities have been identified in tenant.
First language, but also issues of literacy, right?
Correct.
In any language.
Yeah.
Is certainly an issue. And I'm thinking about issues of literacy and language as it has to do with other demographics as well, not only seniors in the portfolio. So when Kevin talked about the arrears, going back to the page, whatever that first page is, if it's mostly family, are we thinking of single family headed households? Are there particular racial ethnic groups? Are we talking about people on disability? I'm just trying to get a sense when you talk about the family portfolio is who is showing up in arrears, given some of the work that Cynthia's shop has been doing with seniors.
So right now, we don't have the demographic information tagged to tenancy in a way that would allow us to pull that information, but with the new tenant service team locally on site, the superintendent, cleaner CMP1s, they're in our buildings every day, they know our tenants. The tenant service coordinator will actually be in the tenant service hub to be able to coordinate service for tenants, as will the CSC that provides access and support. So there will be on site, the ratio is about 1 to 400 units. There will be staff locally housed to understand who we have in our buildings, what their needs are, how we can better support them. So more direct face-to-face contact with tenants.
Okay, can I suggest that in reporting that we break out demographic numbers, please? I keep asking for reports to have demographics attached to it, so we have a better sense in whether or not our responses are targeted enough or focused enough to the particular groups that we're speaking about.
Yeah, I think just on that, Debbie, I'm not sure of the limits of our systems right now relative to the demographic information, but certainly as we implement the homes project, and this is phase 2 of the homes project, that demographic information. So we might be somewhat limited, for the next year, but subsequent to that, we should be able to provide that.
Yeah, but certainly through observation as well, as you report out until our online system is up and running, that we have a sense.
Thank you.
And that speaks to your earlier comments about being able to track what's happening with First Nations and Métis people living in our buildings as well.
Yeah, I think, Sheila, we really would like that macro information, and I think you're right in terms of having the having a greater appreciation from our tenants at the frontline level and in the buildings is great, but I think as a board we'd like to know who from an equity lens, who is showing up, and how can we actually put programs and services in similar to what we did with seniors.
Absolutely.
And we saw great progress with seniors. There's other groups that now actually I think we're at a maturity that we should actually be looking at, okay, what else can we be doing, and what languages could we go out with right at the beginning? So it's a starting point. I think Amanda and Uba, and then I just want to let people know that we're actually about 40 minutes, where it's about 10:40, and so we may not get it through all of the agenda items, which is fine. I think the dialogue is rich, but I'm just flagging it for meeting management. Amanda, and then Uba.
Just to add on to what Debbie said, I do think it's important to have a breakdown of the different demographics, especially the different type of vulnerabilities with the tenants that reside in our buildings. I know as a former tenant rep that I helped a lot of residents who were having issues with literacy that couldn't read, and due to that, their were getting eviction notices because they weren't paying their rent in time, but it was because they were unable to read. So it's assisting them with reading, a lot of residents. And I also wanted to know if there's any type of support in place for residents who need assistance in understanding how their rent is calculated. As a former tenant rep as well, there's been a lot of residents who have come forward and asked me to help them break down how their rent is calculated or why they're being charged more. And it's a very complicated process. I don't know how to do that. So maybe if there's some type of workshop we can provide in the buildings to show tenants how that's done.
Yeah.
To help them understand.
Good idea.
That's a great idea, Amanda. You know, and those kinds of things at that local level, more and more, right?
Legislation simplifies it.
Yeah, exactly. But just having that discussion. Uba?
Thank you, Amanda. I was thinking the same line. And so one suggestion I was thinking is maybe to hire, and I know every time we want to hire people, it's money. It's to hire more people within the tenant who speaks different language.
Absolutely.
That's one way that we can look into that. Also, if we can have maybe, if that's not doable, maybe if we can have a phone system where people, when they go to local management, if things arise, that they can call. I think we have that system within the call center, but I'm talking about when people go, since we bring in services close to the buildings, inside, management, if we have that extra support, I think that would help us a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really nicely linked. If we have a better appreciation for who lives in our buildings, we can have a better appreciation who we should be hiring that represent the people that live in our buildings. So it kind of comes to that. Can I ask for an approval of this item and move to the next item? An approval for information. Uba, seconded by Amanda. All in favor? Yeah, thank you. The seniors quarterly update. We have a new general manager for seniors. I'm assuming that's you, Jill. So Jill is here if people have questions in terms of the seniors report.
Jill, could you just join us? I'm not sure that everybody's met Jill.
Jill is our new general manager for seniors, and we wanted to make sure everybody knew who she was. Welcome to the team. Any questions about this? Is really important work that we know actually is, I would say, transformational for our organization, the seniors work, and there was a quarterly report on the activities that and the goals are nicely laid out in terms of what seniors have told us is most important. Any questions, comments? Otherwise, I'm going to take it as read and go ahead, Deb.
Just to amplify Uba's message, I noticed that in your next quarter, you'll be looking at hiring new positions, and we keep equity hiring front and center in terms of language and ethnicity and race.
The one thing I'd just like to also offer is probably working there. I just want to also emphasize, as you see in the report, we're continuing to do consultation with staff and tenants. And a big part of our current programming around the next set of consultation with tenants is to have a wide variety of demographics and ethnic groups and accessibility participants joining, with a considerable effort around making sure we're getting out into numerous buildings and getting a large percentage of tenant attendance to be able to participate. So we'll be happy to report more on that in the future.
Great, thank you. There's a theme. We're throwing this out to staff. We really need to know who lives in our buildings. So that's terrific. Thank you. To keep an eye on that. That would be great. Thank you. Can I have a approval for information for the senior? Thank you, Debbie. Seconded by John. All in favor? Great. And the next item is the pest management. Do we have a deputation on that?
Pest management. God, what a problem.
Oh, sorry. I just skipped because I had my the update on tenants first. My apologies.
We don't have a deputy.
We don't have so this is also important. So this is keeping us on track with the Tenants First mandate. And Kevin and the city manager have been meeting monthly. And any questions about what's happening on Tenants First? John.
Okay, sorry. We're on item 6. Item 6,
Number
right.
six.
So What was my question? What was it? Oh, it's in regard to the agencies that are in our facilities.
Your favorite topic.
What happens if an agency becomes insolvent?
Scott?
I've never been asked that question before, and I'll say that I don't know the answer. Are you specifically asking about the agency transfers reflected in the tenant
and the agreement. So, and the agreement, because there was in my old job, in my ward, there was an organization called Micro Skills that provided training and workplace, management techniques to mostly new Canadians, and it went bankrupt. And it was supported, I think it received some money from the city, it received some money from Rotary, and then one day it just wasn't there. So with the transfer of these properties, I would like to know, are there guarantees in place? What happens if the agency either becomes insolvent or decides this, or at some point in time, can they sell the property?
Yeah, so let me handle that at a high level. The city has, and they've advised me that they have in their agreements with whoever is being transferred of the property, that situations like that the property would revert to the city. So I have to defer to city real estate and city legal in terms of the specifics, but we'll ask specifically about that question. Have they covered insolvencies? Because what they're looking for is that the assets that are transferred to them always stay in the provision of social housing. That's fundamentally what they're.
But the ownership is being transferred.
Yes.
Ownership is being transferred. So if an agency finds itself in a financial mess and they need to capitalize on the asset, I just want to know how that is protected, from a legal standpoint.
As I understand it, and this is where we'd have to go back to city legal and real estate to get them to clarify that for us, and we will take that away as an action item, is that in the actual purchase and sale agreements that they have, that there is a provision for things like that it ultimately, in essence, and this is where I'm going to stray into legalese that I'm not proficient in, but essentially null and voids the agreement and the transaction reverts back to the city. So there's something in and along that line, because it's a question that we have raised on transfer.
Who ultimately is approving the transfer from a legal standpoint, city council or the board?
The council has already provided its approval. It is the city staff, as I understand it, that is in charge of the transfer, correct? There's no reason to go back to council on a transaction by transaction basis.
So ultimately this board will conduct the transfer of the asset. We'll be one party. Once the asset is transferred, that agency will become a housing provider. That is, we haven't actually executed one of these yet, so we haven't tested it, but the policy understanding is that they become a housing provider like a little tiny co-op.
Right.
And they have the same accountabilities to the city as a service manager, and the city has the same authorities that it would have. TCHC would be completely out of the picture at that point. We're not accountable for the ultimate destiny of that property once it leaves our hands, so long as we're disposing of that property in a way that's consistent with our service manager's approval, which of course they've given.
So just to be clear though, Scott, because I want to be really clear on that, the city is running the RFP on these properties. So the way you left it, it could be interpreted that in fact we're actually in charge of this process. We're going to execute the transaction because we actually own the assets. Right. But the city is, through Juliana's team, is actually managing this whole process through and selecting the ultimate successful agencies.
Generally speaking, in terms of that question, the city would remain in the role of service manager and would have a certain authority under the Housing Services Act to step in if there was a housing provider that was in jeopardy. Okay.
It goes back to the city, and then the city can reissue an RFP.
Exactly, and that can happen.
But I think the essence of the question is, and the direction, the action item for us is to go back to the city and ask the city to provide us with a paper that we can share with this committee and the board that defines how they protect the ultimate ownership of this asset in the event of things like a substantial sale of business, for example, would be another thing that I would think about, or an insolvency.
Great, that would be a good thing to pass along in between meetings so that we have it. Debbie?
Yeah, just raise something else for me. So, as an agency, if I was facing difficulties, can I sell the property?
That's what I was asking.
Yeah, my understanding is no, and that's where I'm going to go back and get the specific wording and the opinion that they've got to substantiate that this wording can actually be enforced.
So we'll get that confirmation. Any other questions on tenants first? Let's keep an eye on this. And with that, can I have an approval for information? John, seconded by Debbie. All in favor? Thank you. That now we're at Pest Management. And we have a deputation on this one? Ms. Wilkinson?
Yeah, they were one of my member agencies.
Tenants would be shocked if I didn't get up and talk to this item. Is this on? Oh, there it is. Okay. So, what I want to say is I noted from the previous meeting there was a request to bring forward an update on pest management. And what I want to say to you as a committee, and I would say the same thing to the board, talking about pests is not a one-off discussion. We should be talking about it regularly, perhaps even quarterly, because pests are a significant concern to our tenants, and it comes at a cost to them emotionally, physically, and financially. Some tenants are actually suicidal, where they take medications to cope, particularly when it comes to bed bugs. The other thing I would say is missing from this report on page 2 of 4, well, we talk about the number of work order requests. We don't talk about at what cost to this corporation. So just out of curiosity, I went back a few years to see what was Toronto Community Housing previously paying for pest control at our buildings. And in 2014, we were paying $2.3 million. So I'm ever hopeful that that number has gone down, but you will never know until management actually reports to you pest management at what cost. The other thing I would say about this chart is there's no year-over-year comparison. And I often hear some of the members of this committee say, well, how do we know? Is this better than last year or worse than last year? So you're just looking at it, what happened last year and last year only. I'm very sad to see that bed bugs are the #1 pest in our buildings. Now, I know sometimes that goes between bed bugs and cockroaches. They're the most common pest. But it's very concerning to me that the bed bugs are still the most demand request for treatment. On page 3, we talk about supporting tenants. We know that we have an aging tenant population. We have tenants with mental health issues, tenants with disabilities, we have seniors, and we should actually have a plan in place. It's not a new thing that our tenants are aging in place. We should be getting out in front of this and saying, how are we going to better manage this? We're never going to get to a point where we have 0 pests in our buildings. So we need to have a plan on how we're going to help our tenants eradicate that. When I look down at community engagement, we're talking about high needs buildings. All tenants need to be educated, not just you happen to be in a building that has a lot of recurrence. Every tenant, no matter where they live, be it a townhouse, low rise, high rise, they should all be educated about pest management and what this landlord will do, and that this landlord does not want pests in the buildings, and we want to help you, so don't be afraid to reach out for help. Lastly, I want to say congratulations to Richard Groach. Is he here? Oh, there he is, hiding in the corner. Nice try. Congratulations to Richard Groach. It's been my privilege to work with him for many years. One of those areas was actually in the study of bed bugs for 2.5 years with Toronto Public Health, where I was a co-author of a report to the Medical Officer of Health on how to manage bed bugs in the entire city of Toronto. So I know a thing or two about this. I am passionate about it because I don't think our tenants should have to live with these pests, and we need to do everything within our power to make sure that they don't. So congrats to Richard in his new role, but I am very concerned about pest management in Toronto community housing without his expertise. It's big shoes to fill, and I'm very afraid what's going to happen to pest management in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for your history as well. And I think this committee would agree that that pest management is important. This is actually timely in terms of our work plan. So thinking about how often you want some of these items with some of the other things as we're talking about that. Any questions about our pest report? Yeah, John?
Councillor Fletcher wanted me to ask a couple of questions. One in particular is, are we tracking the performance of vendors?
I'll ask Richard to speak to that. Now that you've gotten that great review, you better come up with some good answers.
Should be on.
Yeah, it's on.
So we are tracking vendor performance. We do a little over 3,200 vendor performance assessments on a yearly basis. So
How many vendors do we have?
we have currently 5 pest control vendors that are on contract. They're broke out geographically across the city of Toronto, and each one of those vendors does receive weekly performance reviews. So a licensed technician would attend one of the buildings, do quality assurance backed against the contract provisions. It's all categorized, and then we do monthly visits with the vendor, both at their facilities and within some of our facilities, and we do performance indicators both against their administrative and the performance of the contract.
So when preventative, it says there were 5562 preventative treatments. Would that be that's on page 2, would that be 5,500 preventative treatments, 5,500 different units, or sometimes is it the same unit?
So preventative is the components associated to the physical structure. So we're governed under legislation to provide both demand, which is your in-suite work, and then there's the preventative component, which is the structural management, which is your common spaces, your exterior programs, and so on. We're governed under the Rent Safe bylaw, which is a City of Toronto bylaw that governs how we deploy those services on a monthly basis. So each building in our portfolio that's 3 stories or higher requires a monthly preventative program. So each one of those is one building.
I see, okay. And is there a way to completely eradicate pests from a building? Let's say you were to have everybody move out. Is there a way to go in and completely eradicate a building?
It'll be virtually impossible to completely eradicate, and any full eradication of a building will be very temporary in nature.
Is that because of the do we have pest control problems in new buildings?
We have pest control issues across the City of Toronto, both on the outside of the building and on the inside of the building. Our newer structures, of course, allow us to be a little more successful in how the treatments are deployed. The rebound rates are a little bit lower, but every building in the City of Toronto, whether it's a TCHC or otherwise, is dealing with pest issues. Just construction in itself citywide is helping us see massive increases on pests.
Thank you.
Amanda?
On page 2, it says that TCHC fielded 56,504 work orders. So I'm just wondering, between the 5 vendors, how many employees are there?
For the vendors? Yeah. Each vendor currently has upwards of 7 technicians per vendor that's in the field. And then contractually, we require them to have 1 field supervisor that provides follow-up and quality assurance on themselves, and then they report that back into us as well.
And what's the wait time for tenants that put in a request, a work order for pest management?
Ideally, it would be under 2 weeks, so 10 days in average. So it would be dependent on the day you make the service request. Each building has a standard pest control day and window, whether at AM or PM. So if you schedule in the morning on a Wednesday and the treatments happen in the afternoon, you're looking at 7 days.
Uba?
Just a general question about community engagement. Like, we provide that extra support. So I was wondering, with tenants with mental health issue, like vulnerable tenants and seniors, do we connect them to other services to prepare homes, like in cleaning the place, preparing the place, like other agencies? How do we work with that?
What are the community supports that are available?
So there's a couple different agencies that we use
Extreme Clean, that's
to
what I'm...
support tenants related to preparation specifically. We use partnerships with Toronto Public Health and their mandate to support any individual who's in the seniors portfolio. And then we have a partnership that we established directly with Toronto Employment and Social Services for HSF funding. And the funding that you see spent here is $700,000+. That would be directly related to preparation supports from the outside coming in, deliver the service, and OW funds that.
And that would be not only for seniors, but other vulnerable tenants, I hope, with
It would
people
be for
with mental
seniors
health.
and vulnerable individuals.
Okay, all right, thanks.
You're welcome.
Great. And Amanda? Good questions.
Do you guys ever have a waiting list for people that put in requests for pest treatment?
There is no wait list. We don't have caps on our pest control services in our contracts. We're one of the only ones who don't have a cap on our contract.
Great. Thank you. Good questions. And maybe when we get to the work plan, we can think about how often we want to see this, and maybe some, do we want to see some targets? It's a complex area, the financial piece too, that goes into this, and the emotional connection. This is ripe for the integrated models. Can I have an approval for information for the pest management? Thank you. All in favor? Great. It was Uba and actually everybody's hand went up. So Uba and Amanda.
Oh, Uba and Amanda.
And we're going to number 9, which is the OACH reports. And I expect that everyone has taken a look. Do we have a deputation on this? Of course, Ms. Wilkinson. And I expect actually everybody has read the report. It's very well laid out. Catherine?
Thank you. What I wanted to comment on was on page 11 of the annual report. The chart showing vulnerable tenants. 50% of vulnerable tenants went to the landlord and tenant board. So they went before the landlord and tenant board hearing. This adheres to TCHC arrears collection process. But 50% of tenants went after the landlord and tenant board hearing. And this is totally unacceptable. The purpose of OACH is to ensure those vulnerable tenants go through OACH. So there's something seriously wrong here. In essence, once again, we appear to be using the landlord and tenant board to intimidate 50% of these tenants into paying their arrears. The majority of which were vulnerable tenants, some with perhaps majority with mental health concerns, and OACH was created to ensure vulnerable tenants did not slip through the cracks. Operating staff didn't recognize these tenants as vulnerable. The legal department, alongside of processing this, did also not acknowledge these tenants were vulnerable. And so they went through to be evicted at the landlord and tenant board. Again, it's part of education, but our staff need to be trained to recognize what the signs are when tenants are vulnerable, so this does not happen. Staff need to be held accountable. Tenants' lives and homes are at stake. So right now, as it stands, to my shame and embarrassment, vulnerable tenants have a 50-50 chance of getting help from Toronto Community Housing when they need it most. And congratulations on your 2019 achievements. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, there's lots in the report that is worthy of congratulations. Maybe we could have some comments from Sheila, and because I think the things that we actually as a board have been really pushing has been early identification and the OACH relationship with TCHC to actually put much more in prevention. So Sheila, and I'm going to put it over to you because I think that has been the recommendation that's been coming from the office.
So we've been working very closely with OACH. We have an ACT.
Oh, it's not on.
Arrears collection process working table. We're making good strides at looking at the process that existed and trying to look at that from first principles, from the tenant experience lens. So as we develop that process, you will see improvements in an earlier identification of vulnerability and an appropriate and a transfer at the appropriate time over to OACH.
When do you think we'll start seeing changes? Because this has been kind of on our radar for a long time. I think actually, to be honest with you, the annual report is excellent, but I'd like to actually see us seeing less people, and that would be a sign of success, and that people that need to be seen are seen earlier, but that we're actually, with this new model, that we're actually helping people and knowing who our vulnerable tenants are, knowing what the issues are, in front of it. How long do you think it's going to take before we can get there, and what kind of metrics do you think we could be putting in place?
So we will have identified staffing under the new tenant service hub model by the end of March, down to frontline staff. The 3 regions will be up in place by the end of March, and we'll start bringing tenant service hubs on stream into the second quarter of this year. We want to ensure that when the hubs open, that the staff are working as an integrated team and have had the right training, coaching to enable them to be effective. So that's a long answer to a question. In summary, you'll see changes starting in community early April, and those will carry on throughout the balance of 2020 as each hub comes online with the right staffing and training in place.
Great, and I'm sorry, I'm taking chair's prerogatives, but I have a question also for Cynthia in terms of the early resolution officers. Will they be co-located or working differently in these new communities?
That was discussed at one point, but given that there's only 5, it's not really practical that they would be co-located around the city. But we are working, like Sheila said, on the new arrears collection process, which I think you're going to be, well, I hope you're going to be impressed with and think it'll really help tenants, because the idea is that there's going to be a fulsome engagement by the frontline staff early on in the process, much like the OACH approach. They're going to be doing that up front, and that will include identifying vulnerable persons, because we know that's been a concern for a couple of years now, probably since the start of OACH. But I think this working group that's working together on this, we really are probably about a month away from being finished this new process. I don't want to tie Sheila's hands, so Sheila had said maybe by the 4th month or something. I would actually think it'll take longer, and so I just want to set realistic expectations, because I think we'll do the training. OACH is going to be involved in the training, so I'm really hoping that we can transfer some of our skills. But I think it takes practice. So really, all of this is always retroactive. So I would say maybe by 3rd quarter, we'd really start to see a change. What do you think, Sheila? Yeah. Sorry for my voice, everyone, by the way, I'm sick.
As I was explaining, it will start with the rollout of hubs in Q2, but it will take time for hubs to come online with the right training.
Great. And I'm going to put out to you too, Cynthia, something that seems to be a theme today as well in terms of demographics, that if your office can help us with further demographics, that actually could be a starting point. That shouldn't be that hard in terms of actually really being specific in terms of who, not just the concerns, but just who we're seeing by further demographics. That could be a helpful thing as well.
Yeah, if you look in the report, you will see that we've broken down the types of vulnerabilities and also ages. but we've not been engaged in taking any other demographics.
Yeah, I wonder if, since it's a small group, that could be not that hard to, like you're actually, you might find that, what I have found in healthcare is that if you don't ask, you don't get the information, but that actually people are much less hesitant to give information if they know that it's actually going to go somewhere that is helpful and that it's going to help them. So just a thought in terms of a smaller sample, because sometimes it's hard to actually make huge change, but that might actually be a starting point. I'll open it up to anybody else. Sorry for taking a few liberties there. Debbie?
You actually clarified a number of things. So yeah, just to reinforce in terms of demographics, and we're talking about gender, we're talking about race, we're talking about issues of disability and Indigenous status. Indigenous identity, not status, sorry.
Any other questions, comments? All right, so I heard that people felt very comfortable with your annual report. Thank you for all the work. Please extend that thank you to your team. It takes a team to put together a report like this. So can I ask for an approval? Sorry, did hands go up? Debbie, seconded. John, all in favor? Everyone, thank you. And we'll move on to I got so wrapped up into that one. We'll move on to the referral agreements.
Sorry, 9B.
Oh, sorry, the work plan, sorry.
Don't have a deputant on that.
We don't have a deputant on that. So that was the annual report. Anything that people had questions of in terms of the work plan? Maybe adding some of those requests that we had in terms of, if there was a way to actually think about that would be helpful. Because if you don't institutionalize it, it doesn't happen. Right. Great. So if there aren't any questions, I think I'm going to ask for an approval of the work plan. John, was that a nod and a seconder? All in favor? Great. And I think now this is not going to the board anymore, right? It ends here?
The recommendation is that it be forwarded to the board for its approval.
Okay. So okay. Thank you. I just couldn't remember.
Does the personal one as well? I'm just curious. Has that been resolved, Darren?
Just maybe the report. We'll get back to you.
Okay.
The referral, thank you. The referral agreements update, do we have a deputant on that?
We do.
Ms. Wilkinson?
Yes, thanks. And I'm going to be brief on this report. I had opportunity to speak with Scott before he came before you, and he's not surprised to hear my comments. And in fact, he seemed to be supportive of what I wanted to share. On page 2 of 3, we consulted with key internal stakeholders. Then we talked about we spoke with external stakeholders, including the City of Toronto's SSHA and others. And then it says we're going to go on to incorporate the feedback from all these consultation sessions to finalize the referral agreement policy. So once again, and I think I'm repeating myself, the most important stakeholder is the tenants themselves. We did not have any consultation with tenants. You have heard tenants come before this committee and this board about what's going on in our communities when these referral agencies are not adhered to, when there's no audits, when there's no follow-up. Some of these tenants are wreaking havoc in our communities, and that has to stop. We appreciate they pay market rent. So thanks for that. You tick that box. But if they're disturbing the rights of others in their community, if they're threatening, if they're beating people up, well, we don't have time to keep chasing agencies to do their job. So the tenants themselves who live in the communities where we have these agreements, they have a right to know what the expectations are of service agreements. I'm not suggesting you put a gold star on each unit that, might be a tenant of a service agent. But I'm just saying, we need to publicize what the agency requirements are. Tenants have been begging for this for years. Look, we're not going to make the decisions for you, but we have the right to feel safe in our communities, and you have a responsibility to make sure that we are. Thank you.
Question.
Go ahead, John.
Are you suggesting that some tenants might object to some of the service providers providing service in their buildings?
I think the issue that we have, and I think Scott's touched on it, the provision of services is inconsistent. And the intervals at which that service is provided is also inconsistent, I guess, depend on the needs of the individual tenant. So we need to figure out what are those expectations. We have to, and maybe it can't be standardized template, one size fits all. There may be exceptions based on the needs of the tenants that are being serviced.
But what do you think you're going to get if you go and ask the tenants about their feedback from these 18 unique service providers? You're going to get a different opinion from everyone you ask, and it's not a question of whether or not they're, we should renew their agreement. Do you think we should be asking the tenants if we should be renewing these agreements?
No, because ultimately it's the corporation that enters into those agreements, but it's up to us to make sure that by entering into these agreements, we are not putting our other tenants at risk. So that's what the other tenants want to know. We know we have some of these agency units in my building, but the tenants are causing problems. We want to know that the landlord's going to take care of that.
But what you say the tenants are at risk? At risk of what?
For instance,
Behavioral issues that are put in
I'm just
buildings.
challenging, the service providers there to provide service to the tenants to make life better for them in the community. And then you're saying we should be consulting the tenants because the tenants are at risk. I don't.
So these are the tenants who are not under the service agreement.
But this.
Okay, so you'll love this. So you're with an agency in my building, and you have erratic behavior and you're running around the building, and it's bothering me, and I'm not with an agency, so I expect Toronto Community Housing to do something about your behavior.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that there are concerns that agency-referred tenants are causing issues.
Yes, they're not properly monitored and audited. We don't do, I don't think we do assessments, so we have no idea whether what we entered into was actually delivered. Where we see, and Toronto Community Housing will have statistics on this, where we see high numbers of agency units in buildings, we will also see the direct correlation of the problems and antisocial behavior related to those units in our buildings. So that's what we have to get at. We can all live in the same building, but I have the right to my peace and enjoyment, and my landlord should be making sure that I have that.
Can I ask Scott to maybe respond in terms of, thanks, Catherine. What is the process? So these are, sometimes we have had this issue come to this table a number of times by both parties. So you sometimes have very vulnerable people that are placed in buildings where there are some challenges for the tenants. I wonder if Scott can answer, what is the process for tenant engagement in terms of situations that come up? And I guess in making decisions around which agencies are actually offered these units.
Yeah, and in addition, can you also talk about what the agreements say in terms of
Scott, Sheila? Okay, so Kevin's nodding that it should be Sheila answering.
Okay.
So we have a situation across the portfolio where we have many buildings, tenants with needs that aren't being met. And many of those tenants come with a referral agency with supports in place. So we need to, as a company, understand how to better assess the needs of tenants when they come into our buildings, make sure that the service provider that they're lined up with is the right service provider, make sure that the performance of the service provider is monitored and tracked. And it is something that we are currently working on with SSHA to define what a successful tenancy is, and then to put the right systems in place to be able to monitor and make effective support arrangements for our tenants.
Why SSHA? I thought there were 18 individual service agencies who may refer tenants.
I can speak to that. So I think it's important to draw a distinction between the referral agreement universe and other systems which bring tenants who might have complex needs into social housing. The matter here is the referral agreements, which involves agency partners who've been identified who operate under the umbrella of SSHA, but through a separate intake process that we call a referral agreement. And we've talked about that at the previous meeting. Happy to go over it again. There are other systems that SSHA employs, and this, I think, goes to Catherine's point, and what I think Sheila was getting at is tenants don't necessarily see a distinction. A tenant could be brought in through prioritization under SSHA. So 1 in 7 tenants on the chronological wait list are prioritized through one city policy or another. Those tenants often have attachments to agencies. Sometimes those agencies have use of space agreements. They're not referral agreements. They're not really what's being looked at in this policy, but the broader community doesn't necessarily know the difference. And so I think the point that Sheila's making, and the point that's really relevant here, is that in tandem to this work, we're also talking to SSHA about those agreements as well. But it's happening on a totally separate item that we're not reporting to you right now.
So to break them out.
Yeah.
Is there anything you need from us in terms of this? This is for, like, it's a building knowledge piece. There is a larger issue as well. So, okay. So for information, can I have an approval for information?
So moved.
Debbie, seconded. John, all in favor? Great. Thank you. And our TSC work plan, I think actually, oh, we have a deputy? Okay, of course. Ms. Wilkinson?
Well, people have to live somewhere.
Yeah.
You just give me a seat at the table. Oh, we did that already. Okay, so I wanted to address a couple of things in this work plan, where I looked also at the Tenant Services Committee Charter, which is the next item. But related to that, there are specific items within the charter that are not actually on this work plan. And one of those is talking about security. So, you know, as tenants, they face everyday issues such as disputes between neighbors and noise complaints, etc. Yet the only thing we're bringing to this committee is the violence reduction plan related to criminal activities. But there are many other issues impacting our tenants besides that. And we should, I believe, at this committee be getting a more fulsome report. The other issue is the CCTV cameras. Well, that's on the charter. It's not on your work plan. Previously, there was regular reporting on the investment, the cost to maintain and repair. And the other thing to consider is the return on investment. Is the financial investment resulting in a reduction in crime, evictions for cause increasing, or capturing evidence for Toronto Police Services? This would be good information to know. We've invested millions in CCTV cameras. Are we getting a return on that investment? The other thing I wanted to touch on is tenant issues are fragmented between board committees. This is not a new occurrence. It's been going on for years. But a couple of items came forward, and I don't know if the people on this committee follow what's going on in other committees, but I kind of made it my life's mission to do that, because I often find tenant issues are being addressed at committees other than this one. So you're kind of blinded to what decisions are being made elsewhere. So for instance, in the performance report, I believe we indicated the number of fires that were held at Toronto Community Housing. Well, at the BIFAC committee, they recently received a false fire alarm and supplemental report, telling BIFAC that false fire alarms cost Toronto Community Housing $3.5 million in 2019. Of that, $802,000 was incurred from the top 10 buildings that are having false fire alarms. We're already using covert cameras at several properties where this antisocial behavior is taking place, and perhaps it's time to consider putting covert cameras in these top 10 buildings to be able to capture who's pulling the fire alarm, and just move the cameras from building to building. The other item that was discussed at BIFAC was an update on the air conditioning exchange program. Well, this is very much a tenant issue. This is very much something that tenants would expect to hear a conversation about at this committee. I get that there's an element of risk and therefore it ends up going to BIFAC. But at the minimum, these reports should be shared with the Tenant Services Committee so they've got the whole picture, not divided in not segments of information. And then on the Governance Committee, they were addressing the issue of the deputation policy. And I want to give kudos to Dara for moving this forward. But again, tenants are the largest stakeholder. A conversation that we're going to be looking at that policy might be ideal to have that conversation here at this committee, where tenants are often in attendance or watching online. And I do appreciate there is going to be a fulsome tenant consultation, and I thank you for that. And lastly, what I want to say, it is disappointing we have not included the creation of an air conditioning policy. What happened to that, right? It was urgent that we do it, and now it's just fallen off the table. We should use these winter months to create the air conditioning policy so it can be rolled out simultaneously with the air condition exchange program, posted in every single Toronto community housing community and included in every lease signing. Please, I believe there was a commitment we were going to make one, so it needs to be on somebody's work plan in order for that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Some really good points there. And I think actually we had some other items that have come up today that actually might inform some adjustments to the tenant services, including actually the how frequently we do a review of security, CSU, the ombudsman report, a couple of things that came up, how frequently we actually hear from the commissioner. So questions, comments, missing pieces? I think some good points that Catherine made in terms of other items from other, might not be a bad idea for us to actually, somebody to take a look at the at various work plans. Yeah, I think it probably makes, well, because I think there's been some things that have come up. What if we actually tried to adjust some of those? But if there's anything else that's missing for people, the other thing I'll just plant in here is that you will get a call out around the location of our meetings. Part of our goal with this work plan is also to look at how do we actually engage with more tenants. And although it's wonderful to meet with a few people that we regularly meet with at this location, whether there's a way of having some meetings in the community that are closer. I know that in Sheila's meetings around the changes that you had contact with hundreds of tenants and many of whom were really interested in being more engaged. I don't know what our tenant reps think about that. I know it's sometimes more convenient for the committee to be in one place, but thoughts about that as well. Any comments? Yeah, Amanda.
This is for Sheila. I was just wondering if there is any updates in regards to the Tenant Action Funds application, because it hasn't been revised yet, and I know for January, the deadline was the 31st to submit applications, and OUD has not submitted one application, and there's a lot of tenants that had things that they wanted to roll out, but due to the lengthy process of the application, no one has submitted an application for OUD for the month of January.
So I would ask Julio to answer that question, but we are committed to those tables rolling out in an effective way.
Hello? Hello? So what I can say, sorry, good morning everyone. So what I can say is that we held an evaluation session at the end of December to look at what are the amendments that we need to make to the process, and we're going through that process right now. At the same time, we're rehiring new members for the new cohort for 2020, as the 2019 group is retiring at the end of this month, sorry, at the end of February. So the plan is to make revisions to the former, the package that we have, the application process that we have in place right now, based on the feedback that we gathered through the pilot process for the last 3 months of 2019. So you will see, so you will see some changes to the application as a result of that evaluation process.
Timing?
Yeah. Sorry?
Timing? Yeah. When?
That will be effective this month, February. We're in February already. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So before the deadline for February for the applications to go in, it'll be revised?
Yep, that's it. That's the actual target. That's the plan.
Great question, Ahmed. Other questions around the work plan?
And just a comment with respect to the work plan. This is a document that staff have put together based on what we understand the outstanding action items to come to the board through this committee are. And so it does not, and it's not intended to limit the committee's ability to add other items to its agenda. We're just trying to give a sense to the committee of what's on your upcoming schedule.
And we have always worked with this as being a dynamic document. Something could happen, that it wasn't on our radar, and we want to change it. But I think about if there's any feedback that you have any time around this committee attending to the matters that matter most to our tenants. If you walk away from this meeting and you say, we're not doing that, it's incumbent in all of us to actually think about not just how things are presented, but what's being presented. Now everybody around this table has been here for a longer period of time. You sort of get the rhythm. But if we're missing big things or we can do it differently, we're talking too much about one item and not enough about another, that we can combine things. Anything I think your feedback would be very welcome, and we'll just regularly adjust it. I think Councillor Fletcher has some good ideas too. So with that, we'll accept it as it is with some work to be done on updating. Is that okay? So can I have an approval for information?
No,
It's an approval. It's approval. This is an approval. An approval. Debbie seconded. Uba, all in favor? Great, thank you. And thanks for your comments, Amanda, that was helpful. And then the review of the Tenant Services Committee Charter. As you know, our governance committee and DARA have been doing a lot of work to actually give us our charters so that we know what it is that we're mandated to do, and to try to actually identify those items that actually a committee like ours can actually take from beginning to end. I find personally I get frustrated by the same item coming up at multiple forums and not knowing actually when things actually are for approval. But so if we could look at that. But Debbie, comments?
Just to echo Paula's comments before she left, that especially on the responsibilities, page 1 of 4, wherever overseeing appears, to add the words "and ensuring."
Yeah, that's great. Other items to add?
So this document will then go to the board for ultimate approval, and we'll make that change before it goes to the board meeting on February 20th.
Great. All right. So with that, can I have an approval for information? The approval for to go to the board, because it's going further. And all in favor? Great.
We have
And then, yes, it was John and Debbie, sorry. And with that, I think we have got to the end of our agenda. Miraculously, we are before time. Have that noted, that the meeting ended
Early.
10 minutes before the time. An approval to terminate this meeting. John? Anybody who stands up? Seconded by Debbie. All in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you.